Good morning, everyone. Bob Allen here for Good Morning Oxnard. And Peter isn't around this morning, so we're going to look for George Miller in Citizens Journal, who's sitting here ready to give us a little update on what happened at City Council meeting last night. George?
Good morning, Oxnard. George Miller from Citizens Journal US and Citizens Journal Ventura County on Facebook. We had a very interesting city council meeting last night. I'll start off with the good news first. The city honored the 1972 Sunset Little League champions, almost the USA champions. They made it all the way to the finals and were runners-up in 1972. And the morale was just amazing. They brought in most of the team last night, including a guy as far away as Florida who came to be honored. Mayor Flynn presented the honors and people reminisced. We had a packed house, well over 150 people watching this thing. It was televised. If you go to the City Council website, probably about tomorrow, you should be able to see the entire meeting video. I just wanted to list the names of the players who were there or were on it. Craig Yonker, Frank Rodriguez, Victor Brown, George Hill, Larry Gutierrez, Sterling Bruner, Dave Escobar, Alan Pinedo, Tom Barber, Jim LaPointe, and Darrell Samuel, who are now in the annals of history. And a suggestion was made that they be inducted into the Ventura County Hall of Fame. And while that can't be done without being on the agenda, the City Council people did resolve to bring that up in a future meeting and try to make that happen. Well, we have good news and bad news today. Both good news and bad news is that the city performed a major audit of its operations over the last few months. And that audit was done by outside consultant Management Partners and Rennie Sloan, an HR consulting firm. And they presented the news last night in over 100-page report, which they summarized succinctly in about 2 hours. And basically, if I try to summarize it, what we have is evidence of what is a deeply dysfunctional city organization. And as a result, a number of top city people have left, the city manager, several department heads, and the new city manager, Greg Neithoff, brought in several consultants to assist him with it simply because we didn't have the manpower and skills to do it ourselves, nor the objectivity to look at the city from an objective point of view and decide what the problem was. So to summarize what we have, first of all, we have some huge deficits. They had talked initially about a $3 million estimated deficit to the general fund. That number is probably at least 3 times that amount, which almost dictates that we have some fairly sharp cutbacks in certain areas to balance the budget. Some can be done with loans, some can be done with reserves from the general fund, but the general fund reserves are already considerably below what they should be, so there's only a limited amount to do that. But basically the deficits fall in the area of the accrued leave problem, which we've discussed at previous sessions of Good Morning Oxnard, negative fund balances in the assessment districts. Now, what is an assessment district? It's an area of a fund set up to handle certain services. For example, in my neighborhood, it handles landscaping and things like that. And the idea is enough money should be collected through tax assessments to pay for the services. Well, there's about a $3 million deficit in those funds. There's another $6 million deficit in what are called impact fees. Those are fees paid mostly by businesses to absorb the impact of their operations on the community. We also have approximately a $5.7 million accrued deficit for the golf course and the Performing Arts Center as well. And then we have some new problems. It seems that they will have to hire more people in HR, human resources, to be able to make some regulatory requirements and run the operation properly. We have a problem with Social Security payments as well for certain employees who are not on the pension program. We have also major deferred costs in the wastewater development, wastewater system of the city, the water system, and roads as well. So all those things combined mean we have an enormous deficit. Now, how do we get to those deficits? Well, basically we have a lot of things that weren't being done. One of the primary things is a lack of adherence to policies and procedures, city policies and procedures that were overlooked, that allowed these things to occur, which are basically against the city policies and in some cases even illegal as well. It's probably going to take quite a while to work those out. We have a number of open positions right now that they're trying to fill, such as the Human Resources Department. Basically, our development manager, Matt Winiger, is leaving. We also have the Utilities Department has openings as well. So by the time those positions are filled and they come in and the new people do their organization and their hires, it's going to be probably about a year and a half before that all shakes out. So last night, the city voted to continue the services of the outside consultant who's here to do still more work and finish up what they've started, an attempt to eventually wean us away from those services sometime in the future. There's so much in this report, I couldn't possibly convey it to you in a brief report. So what I would recommend you do is go to the Oxnard City Council website, download the report from the March 17th meeting if you're really interested. There's both a PowerPoint type presentation and a much more detailed written report of over 100 pages that details the problems. Most people don't want to get into that detail, which is why we do these summaries here today. We will be releasing an article later this week on that on citizensjournal.us, which you can read to get a brief summary instead of sitting through a 6-hour meeting like I did last night to be able to tell you this today. Next, I want to talk about the harbor agreement. Channel Islands Harbor has been managed and is in fact owned by Ventura County. The last 51 years, the county has administered the harbor under Lynn Krieger, who's our current harbor director, and interfaces with the city for various types of services. Well, to make a long story short, when the agreement expired, we weren't ready with a substitute agreement. There were just too many disagreements. So for the last year and a half, a citizens group and the city and the county have worked together to attempt to negotiate a new agreement. And the new agreement really hits 3 different areas. The maintenance of the harbor, who's responsible, what services, who gets paid, operations, the ongoing operation of the harbor, and then last and probably most important, the developmental policies. How do we bring new businesses into the harbor? How do we expand businesses? How do we decide what gets developed, where in the harbor, who and how, and that kind of stuff. Well, the bottom line is that the draft agreement presented last night was overwhelmingly and resoundingly defeated. Both city council members who were on the task force, Mayor Flynn and Councilman Perello, were opposed to the new agreement. Every single resident or business that spoke last night was opposed to the agreement. Mainly, not with all of the agreement, but mainly with the developmental responsibilities. And the real core issue is that Oxnard wants to have more of a say about what gets developed and how and the approval process, and that simply was not in the agreement. In fact, some of the citizens who were on the committee felt that they were ambushed because it was their understanding that developmental things would not be addressed at all in the agreement, that would focus only on maintenance and operations. But in fact, a large section, starting on page 4, was dropped into that agreement that they had never seen, never agreed to, and would not agree to. In addition, the Channel Islands Harbor Community Services, which is actually a utility that provides water and wastewater, was specifically excluded by the agreement. It said that the city will take it over. That evidently was news to the president of that organization, who got up and said, what the heck is going on? And I think that will be changed as well. They still have 6 years to run on their contract. It's not a simple matter of dropping it because they own a lot of the assets. So there would have to be a transfer of assets and an agreement negotiated to do all that. So the upshot of it is that the council voted 4-0 to reject the agreement. The reason it wasn't 5-0 is that Councilman McDonald is currently in Washington, D.C., testifying about trying to keep the base in Ventura County and testifying on certain types of money that we need for other purposes as well. So the conclusion is that the agreement was sent back to the county for basically renegotiation and resubmittal at some future time. Alternative suggestions were to sign the agreement but without the development section for a period of only a year or two to allow some time. Well, the bottom line is the agreement expires today, so there is no agreement, so we're not even sure legally if we can go on each other's property and maintain it. So some kind of an agreement has to be set up simply so we can continue to run the harbor in the interim. The city says they'll continue to supply the services they're responsible for, but there's all kinds of little details about liability insurance and things like that that have to be sorted out. So it's going to be a little bit chaotic for a while. So that's the bottom line on the harbor agreement. We have published 3 articles on the subject, which you can read. One published, written by David Finn last Friday, who's been intimately involved in some of the harbor things and the homeowners associations. I also wrote an article on the overall submission, and then last Tuesday, we interviewed Mayor Flynn and David Finn about the harbor agreement. It's about a 40-minute video, which is very detailed, which you can also find on citizensjournal.us. That's the main things we wanted to talk about this week. So I'm going to sign off right now, and we'll see you next week. Again, KADY TV and citizensjournal.us. Good afternoon.
Thanks so much, George, and we look forward to another good report just like that next week. You take care.
Take care.